Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. This week we have another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is our 68th deck and it's titled I've Come to Bargain. And if you haven't seen this show before, what we are doing is randomly selecting a card from Scryfall.com, working with a budget of $100 or less, and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So first up, before we get into the actual deck tech, I do want to very quickly highlight some of our social media accounts. If you are ever interested in reaching out to us, asking questions, suggesting cards for future videos, you can always reach out to us on Twitter at 13POYNZ, Reddit u/POYNZ13, email dungeonlearnersguide@gmail.com, or if you're looking to support our content a little bit more directly, you can always head on over to TCG Player using our affiliate link, which is in the description of this video. And any cards you purchase from their website, once you've clicked on that link, lets them know that we sent you over there and we get a little bit of kickback from them. And of course, you can also go to our Patreon account, patreon.com/dungeonlearnersguide, where you can help support us with a little monthly donation every month and get access to the deck lists a week early, get access to a Discord channel where we actually put together some of the games and talk about building some of the deck lists. And there's also the option to get full access to the unedited videos for the gameplay where you get to hear the players interacting with each other rather than just my commentary over top of it. So if that is something you're interested in, please do check that out. And if none of that sounds like something that you would be interested in, you can, of course, always just like this video, subscribe to the channel. That does help out quite a bit. And, of course, before we move on, I do have to shout out our 3 current patrons. We have William Swiftfoot, we have Doodle, and we have Observer Will. Thank you 3 very much for all of the support that you give, and I'm hoping that this video kind of lives up to expectations. So, without any further ado, let's get into the actual deck tech. So we got to start with our random card of the week. And in this case, the random card was suggested to us by LethalVagabond over on Reddit. And that card is Lich's Mirror. So Lich's Mirror is 5 mana for an artifact that says if you would lose the game, instead shuffle your hand, your graveyard, and all permanents you own into your library, then draw 7 cards, and your life total becomes 20. So this is essentially a get-out-of-jail-free card. If at any time we're going to lose the game, we do all of this stuff instead. We shuffle everything in, we draw 7 cards, and our life becomes 20. Now, it is important to note that there are some conditions where we would lose the game that Lich's Mirror does not save us. So, for example, if we have 10 poison counters, we would still lose the game. We would trigger Lich's Mirror, we would do all of this, we would shuffle everything in, draw 7, life total becomes 20, but then the next time state-based actions are checked, the game would see that we have 10 poison counters and we would still lose anyway. The same thing for taking 21 commander damage from someone's commander. So this is not a 100% foolproof get-out-of-jail-free card, but it is most of the time. There's not going to be a ton of times where this doesn't work, so that is important to know before we get into the actual deck tech. And so, if we are looking to not die, that's our only goal with Lich's Mirror, we need a commander that kind of works with that theme, and you might be a little surprised by the commander we picked. So this week, we have a 3-color commander. We are back in the Esper colors just like we were last week, but this time we are playing Nihiloor. And Nihiloor is 2 white, blue, black for a legendary creature, Horror. He's a 3/5. And when Nihiloor enters the battlefield, for each opponent, tap up to 1 untapped creature you control. When you do, gain control of target creature that player controls with power less than or equal to the tapped creature's power for as long as you control Nihiloor. Whenever you attack with a creature an opponent owns, you gain 2 life and that player loses 2 life. So, you might be wondering why Nihiloor specifically is in the command zone when it has nothing to do with dying, or I suppose not dying, the way that Lich's Mirror does. And yes, he was chosen mainly for the colors. However, there is a unique synergy that comes along with this card. But before I explain that, I do want to take a look at some themes for the deck. So let's talk about the themes, and then I'll explain how Nihiloor and Lich's Mirror work together with what we're trying to do. So our first theme, as we kind of mentioned with Lich's Mirror, we're just trying to not die. This entire deck is based around the idea of our opponents trying to kill us, and every time they try to kill us, we somehow find a way to just say, no, that's not allowed, we're not going to die. You can kill anyone else at the table, but not us. And that is where something like Stunning Reversal comes in, which is 3 and a black for an instant, that says the next time you would lose the game this turn, instead draw 7 cards and your life total becomes 1, exile Stunning Reversal. So just like Lich's Mirror, this is not a get out of jail free card in all situations. We will still die to commander damage. We will still die to infect and things like that. However, this does give us the option to try to turn things around, because unlike Lich's Mirror, it doesn't shuffle all of our permanents into our deck. We are able to continue going from where we were before, plus we've just drawn 7 cards, and yeah, our life total is 1, so we're still pretty easy to kill, but this can save us from a huge, alpha strike from our opponents. This could save us from a massive Aetherflux Reservoir shot. Any big effect this will save us from. If it's, an infinite amount of 1 damage triggers, then unfortunately there's not much we can do, but it's at least worth a shot. Trying to not die is always difficult, so of course, if it were super easy, everyone would do it. So that is theme number 1, of course, just don't die. Theme number 2 is going to look a little bit different here. Theme number 2 is about stealing our opponent's things, and this is where Nihiloor actually does a phenomenal job of doing what this deck wants to do. So we have Agent of Treachery, for example, 5 blue for a 2/3 human rogue. When Agent of Treachery enters the battlefield, gain control of target permanent, and at the beginning of your end step, if you control 3 or more permanents you don't own, draw 3 cards. So of course, we're going to be stealing our opponent's things. That is where Nihiloor really shines. And you'll notice that that has nothing to do with Lich's Mirror. Why would we want to steal things if we're trying to just not die? And the short answer to that is that Lich's Mirror specifically says we shuffle all permanents we own into our library. If we steal something from our opponents and trigger Lich's Mirror, we get to keep the things we stole. We don't have to shuffle that in. So this is a great way of making sure that we still have some form of board and we don't just immediately die once Lich's Mirror resolves. So being able to steal all of our opponent's best things means that not only are we not going to be dying because we're just super hard to kill, we're also going to take their best things and keep them around for when we would, quote unquote, die, and be able to keep playing the game. So it's incredibly important that we have a ton of cards that we don't own because we don't want to have to shuffle them back into our deck. And in a similar vein of thinking, our last theme is also going to be phasing. Because again, if a permanent, just like something that we stole, if a permanent is phased out, we can't shuffle it back into our library. So we can use something like March of Swirling Mist, which is X and a blue for an instant, that says as an additional cost to cast this spell, you may exile any number of blue cards from your hand. This spell costs 2 less to cast for each card exiled this way, and up to X target creatures phase out. So if we have 5 creatures on the board, we can spend 5 mana into the X, making it cost 6 mana total, phase out all 5 of our creatures in response to a massive swing from our opponents that would kill us, trigger Lich's Mastery, draw the 7 cards, go to 20 life, shuffle everything back in. But again, we can't shuffle permanents into our deck that are phased out. So that means we would go to untap for our turn and immediately get all of our creatures back. And yeah, we don't have our lands or any artifacts or enchantments, but that gives us a fighting chance, because it is incredibly difficult to win the game once Lich's Mirror triggers if we don't have anything on the board. So Agent of Treachery, March of Swirling Mist, stealing things, phasing things out, that's how we're going to keep our permanents on the board when all of our don't die effects take place. And so those are our themes for the deck this week. A little bit unique, had to kind of dig into what made Lich's Mirror work, but I'm very happy with these themes. And I think to further expand on this, let's take a look at some key cards in the deck, some cards that really help synergize and bring the whole thing together. So first up, we have Eerie Interlude, which is 2 and a white for an instant. Exile any number of target creatures you control, return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Now, I'm actually going to talk about Eerie Interlude and our second key card, Guardian of Faith, together, because Guardian of Faith and Eerie Interlude do almost the exact same thing, but with different wording. Guardian of Faith is 1 white for a 3/2 flash vigilance. When Guardian of Faith enters the battlefield, any number of other target creatures you control phase out. So what both of these cards do is allow us to have a massive board of creatures, whether we've stolen them or not. Well, let's be honest, if we've stolen them, you don't want to use Eerie Interlude because they'll go back to their owner's control, but Guardian of Faith works fine. But if we have a big board of creatures, we can either exile them or phase them out, and then be able to, just like we talked about earlier with March of Swirling Mists, trigger the Lich's Mirror, and then shuffle everything back in, draw 7, gain 20 life, and all of our stuff will come back either at our end step with Eerie Interlude or our upkeep or untap step with Guardian of Faith. So these are great ways to protect our entire board and make sure that when Lich's Mirror triggers, we're able to still get all of our creatures back. This is also a great way to make sure that if our opponents try to board wipe, we can still protect our board. Maybe they're trying to kill our board or kill everyone's board so they can get their commander back or they can get some key creature into their graveyard. Nope, all of our stuff phases out, all of our stuff is exiled, and now when it comes back, we have a board, our opponents don't. So that's why these two are both considered key cards, and I did want to talk about both of them because they are very good and very important for very different reasons. Obviously, Eerie Interlude is going to be more useful on our own stuff. We can't do this for stuff that we stole, but it does allow us to trigger enter the battlefield effects again. Guardian of Faith doesn't care if we stole stuff, but it doesn't let us trigger enter the battlefield effects, and it does also kill the Guardian because he can't phase himself out. So, very different overall effects, but at the same time very similar. And that does lead us into our last key card for the deck, and this one is Cloudsteel Kirin, a pretty recent card from Kamigawa. Cloudsteel Kirin is 2 and a white for a 3/2 artifact creature equipment Kirin. It's got flying. Equipped creature has flying, and you can't lose the game, and your opponents can't win the game. Reconfigure for 5. So it comes in as a creature, and it does not have this ability to make sure that we don't lose the game and our opponents can't win the game when it's a creature. We have to equip it to something to get that effect. However, because it is an equipment and also a creature, it's going to be a lot harder to kill. If we can equip this, our opponents could kill the creature, but then we just get the Kirin back, we re-equip it, we keep going. So Cloudsteel Kirin plays a lot of different roles in this deck, and we have quite a few cards that do what Cloudsteel Kirin does, the idea that we can't lose the game and our opponents can't win the game. But Cloudsteel Kirin is the hardest kill, because most of the time when we play this, it's not going to be a creature. We want to try to equip it right away. And the nice thing is, if we equip it to something and then we have to phase that permanent out, Cloudsteel Kirin will phase out with it because it's an equipment. Yes, that means we lose the ability, but that means that we don't have to worry about phasing out a creature, it turns back into a creature, and then someone kills the Kirin. We can make sure that we protect the Kirin at the same time as any creature it's attached to, which makes it a lot more versatile than some of the other effects in here, and also a very important piece, because sometimes if our opponents don't have artifact removal, this thing just lives forever and just kind of makes sure we win the game because they can't kill us. So a very important piece, a very useful piece. But that is the last of our key cards for this deck. So moving into our next section of this deck tech, we're going to take a look at some cool interactions, some cards that work incredibly well together and synergize very well together. The first of these cool interactions is going to be Aetherios Shroud Veiled and Dam. So I will admit, Dam could be replaced with any board wipe, but I specifically put this one in here because it says creatures can't be regenerated. And Aetherios is 4 white-black for a 4/7 legendary enchantment creature god. He's got indestructible, and as long as your devotion to white and black is less than 7, Aetherios isn't a creature, At the beginning of your end step, put a coin counter on another target creature. Whenever a creature with a coin counter on it dies or is put into exile, return that card to the battlefield under your control. And if we partner that up with Damn, which is black for a sorcery, destroy target creature, a creature destroyed this way can't be regenerated, but we can overload it for 2 white and destroy each creature instead of target creature. So Athreos allows us to put coin counters on anything. It doesn't have to be our creatures. It just says target creature. So we can put it on our opponent's things. Then we could use Damn to single target removal, just kill that one creature. Or if we've built up 4, 5, 6 coin counters, we can overload Damn, destroy all creatures, and still get the creatures that had the coin counters back under our control. Especially because Athreos is going to have Indestructible. It's not going to die to Damn, meaning we can just kind of wipe the board, keep our big 4/7, and then maybe the creatures we get actually trigger Devotion and we can start attacking with them. Or we get Enter the Battlefield effects again. We're able to rebuy any of our big important creatures. We're able to take our opponent's best creatures. Athreos is a great way to start stealing things from our opponents, but it's also a great way to protect our own things if that's something we need to do. And so, yeah, we could wait for our opponent's stuff to die naturally, but sometimes it's nice to just kind of take the initiative and wipe the board ourselves. So that is why Athreos and Damn are a great pair of cards to be used together. And that does lead us to our next cool interaction, which is going to be between Daxos of Meletis and the Cloak of Invisibility. So Daxos of Meletis, 1 white-blue for a 2/2 legendary creature, human soldier. Daxos of Meletis can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater, and whenever Daxos of Meletis deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of that player's library, you gain life equal to that card's converted mana cost, and until end of turn you may cast that card, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast it. So, in other words, if Daxos hits an opponent, we are able to exile the top card of their library, gain life equal to its mana value, and then cast it this turn. So we need to make sure that Daxos is doing damage and not just getting chumped by little 1/1s. And that is where Cloak of Invisibility comes in, because what it does is give enchanted creature phasing and cannot be blocked except by walls for 1 blue mana. So we can put Cloak of Invisibility onto Daxos of Meletis, and unfortunately, yes, he would gain phasing, so we would only have him every other turn, but that's a guaranteed hit every other turn. So we are guaranteed to be hitting our opponents, exiling their cards, hopefully gaining life, hopefully stealing their things because we're going to cast them, and making sure that no matter what happens, Daxos always has a target, because the odds of all of our opponents having 1 wall creature, very slim, although not technically impossible, but that is why I think Daxos and Cloak of Invisibility can be a very good pair of cards and work super well together for this deck especially. But that brings us to the end of our cool interactions and to the actual budget portion of our deck tech. So this week, our deck came in at $96.36, so we got pretty close to our budget limit. But the nice thing about this budget limit is that a lot of that price came from Platinum Angel. And Platinum Angel, 7 mana, artifact creature angel, 4/4 flying, you can't lose the game, and your opponents can't win the game. Platinum Angel is $9.80. So if you were to cut Platinum Angel from this deck, you're looking at closer to about $87 deck, which still expensive, but it's nowhere near the $96 that it currently is. And there are quite a few cards in this deck that are $5, $6. So if you were looking to trim down some of the cost of this deck, it would not be super difficult. However, Platinum Angel, obviously being the most expensive, would be priority number 1. But if you're looking for a great, just you can't lose the game card, this is one to do it, especially if you can find ways to protect it, make sure that you're able to phase it out if needed, make sure you're able to counter things that come its way. If you can protect a card like this, it's very difficult for your opponents to win, because with it on the board, they literally cannot win. So Platinum Angel, worthy of that $9 price tag, but it is a bit spendy. So if you do need to cut it, it makes sense. However, on the other hand, if you're looking to maybe increase the price of this deck, I do have a couple of out-of-budget upgrades that I would suggest replacing to really flesh out the deck a little bit more. And in this case, there's really only one card, although you could argue it's a cycle of cards that I would suggest replacing, but we're going to focus on one of the cards in that cycle, and that is going to be Pact of Negation. So in this deck, it is very difficult for us to lose. There are a ton of cards that say the next time you would lose the game, do something else. So that is why we can safely run cards like Pact of Negation, which is 0 mana for an instant that says counter target spell. However, at the beginning of your next upkeep, you have to pay 3 blue. If you don't, you lose the game. We can make that last line of text essentially not even exist, and this just becomes a 0 mana counter target spell, which is incredibly powerful, especially when we're looking at protecting our stuff like Platinum Angel or our Cloudsteel Kieran. Anything that we want to keep us alive can be protected by this Pact of Negation. And so to that end, I would recommend swapping out just basic Counterspell, which I know sounds weird because Counterspell is an incredibly powerful card. However, if we can go from a 2 mana Counterspell to a 0 mana Counterspell that does in our deck the exact same thing, this is just a strict upgrade. So yes, there are probably times when we may have to pay the 5 or might unfortunately lose the game because of Pact of Negation, but we can negate that downside a lot more often than we're able to find 2 blue mana in a 3-color deck. So it's incredibly important that we have a way to stop Pact of Negation from killing us, but it is a great, like I mentioned earlier with Lich's Mirror, it's a great get out of jail free card. It's a great just being able to cast a spell and spend no mana and also not lose because of it is phenomenal. That's what we're trying to do. And yes, there are the black and the white pacts as well. If you have the budget and would like to slot those in, I highly recommend it. However, the only one that I'm actually going to recommend for this video, like the only one that we're going to put up on screen, is Pact of Negation, because it's significantly more expensive, and really it just does what we want to be doing. So if you get the chance, if you have a Pact of Negation or don't mind spending $9.72 on one, then this would be a great change for the deck. But that's enough, I think, about the deck itself. We've done enough talking about the deck and the cards. We got to see how this deck actually performs. We got to run this into a game with some opponents and see how it works. So this week, for our opponents, we are joined by Jason, who is playing his Oloro Ageless Ascetic deck, Shawn, who's playing his Umbrous Fear Manifest deck, and Bilal, who is playing his Miriam Sentinel Worm deck. So Jason's Oloro deck is just a straight life gain deck. He wants to gain as much life as possible and then somehow use that life to kill his opponents. I will say I think that might be the deck that I am the most concerned about at this table, because we have plenty of ways to not die, but we don't have a lot of great ways to kill someone who's at 200 life. So if he can gain a ton of life, there's not much we can do, because Nihiloor's only got 3 power. He's not really going to be killing anyone with commander damage, at least not quickly. Next up, Shawn's Umbrous deck is a horror tribal deck, so he wants to play as many horrors as possible, mill out his opponents, exile their libraries, and just make sure that at the end, he has a massive Umbrous that can knock people out with commander damage if he's not able to mill people out first. So I'm not super concerned about Umbrous necessarily hitting us for lethal commander damage, but I am worried about milling, because if he exiles our entire library, it doesn't matter what we can do to stop ourselves from dying, because we won't have a library to draw from. We'll draw a card, lose the game. Maybe we prevent that, but we can't prevent the next one. So very concerned about Umbrous long term, but I think in the short term, I'm not super concerned. And then finally, Bilal's Miriam deck. This is a dragon tribal deck. He wants to play a ton of dragons and get a ton of triggers and copy some dragons. So I think that I'm not super concerned about this in terms of us dying, because of course we have plenty of ways to stop ourselves from dying. But I don't know what kind of enter the battlefield triggers a lot of dragons have. That's not exactly my specialty. So I don't know what could be in here to look out for, but I am hoping that it's just kind of a play big dragons, turn them sideways, because I think we can handle that. But if there's any combos involving dragons where you have multiple copies, then I'm not quite sure how we're going to do. So I am very excited for this game. I think we're running up against some very powerful opponents and very powerful decks. So I'm excited to see how it goes. I hope you are as well. And I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, I get to go first, followed by Jason, Shawn, and then Bilal. On my first turn, I play a Temple of Silence, scrying 1. In Jason's upkeep, he gains 2 life thanks to a Loro and plays a Command Tower. Shawn plays an Evolving Wilds, sacrificing it to search his library for a basic land and put it into play tapped. Bilal plays Otawara, Soaring City, and then casts a Soul Ring. I play a Command Tower and cast Robe of Stars. Jason gains 2 life in his upkeep, then plays a Swamp and casts Suture Priest, allowing him to gain a life whenever a creature enters under his control, and forcing an opponent to lose a life when a creature enters under their control. Shawn plays a Dismal Backwater, gaining a life. Bilal plays a Path of Ancestry. I play an island and cast Daxos of Meletis, which can't be blocked by creatures power 3 or greater, and also exiles the top card of an opponent's library when he deals combat damage to them, gaining me life equal to that card's mana value, and allowing me to cast it until the end of turn, and this loses me a life for the Suture Priest. In Jason's upkeep, he gains 2 life, and then plays a Shine Shadow Snarl, revealing a Plains so that it comes into play untapped, and attacks Shawn for 1. Shawn casts a Thought Vessel, giving him no maximum hand size, and then plays a Dimir Aqueduct, returning a swamp to his hand. Bilal plays a Castle Garenbrig. I move straight to combat, attacking Jason for 2 with Daxos, exiling Erebos, God of the Dead, from the top of his library, gaining 4 life. Then, in my second main phase, I equip the Robe of Stars to Daxos, giving him +0/+3, and allowing me to pay 2 mana to phase him out. I'd also play an Azorius Chancery, returning an island to my hand. In Jason's upkeep, he gains 2 life, plays a Plains, casts a Soul Ring, and then moves to combat, attacking me for 1. Shawn plays a Swamp, and casts Mind Stone, followed up by a Cirque Dimir Lobotanist, losing a life, but allowing him to exile the top card of a player's library whenever he casts a blue or black spell. Bilal casts Rush of Knowledge, drawing cards equal to the highest mana value among permanents he controls, which is currently 1. He also plays a Frostboil Snarl, and passes. I play an island, and move to combat, attacking Jason for 2, exiling Arcane Denial from his library, gaining 2 life, and in my second main phase, I cast Enduring Angel, which gives me hexproof and allows me to transform it if I would die, going to 3 life instead. I also lose a life from the Suture Priest. In Jason's upkeep, he gains 2 life, and then plays a Reliquary Tower, gaining no maximum hand size, and casts Archon of Coronation, becoming the Monarch and making it so that he can't take damage for as long as he's the Monarch, gaining a life from the Suture Priest. He then moves to combat, attacking Bilal for 1, and then, when he moves to his end step, he's able to draw a card because he's the Monarch. Shawn plays a Fetid Pools, and casts Psychic Corrosion, making each opponent mill 2 every time he draws a card. This also triggers Cirque, exiling the top card of Jason's library, and he then casts a Whisper Silk Cloak, and passes. Bilal casts his commander Miriam Sentinel Worm, allowing him to create a non-legendary token copy of any non-token dragon that enters play under his control. This also triggers Suture Priest, losing him a life. I play an island and attack Jason for 2 with Daxos, even though he doesn't actually take the damage, exiling Frozen Aether from his library, gaining 4 life, and I become the Monarch. Then in my second main phase, I cast Jason's Frozen Aether, making my opponent's creatures, lands, and artifacts enter the battlefield tapped. Then, at the end of turn, I draw for being the Monarch. In Jason's upkeep, he gains 2 life, and casts Despark, exiling his own Frozen Aether. This allows him to play an island untapped, and cast Commander Sphere before passing. When Shawn draws for his turn, each opponent mills 2. He then moves to his first main phase and casts his Commander Umbrous Fear Manifest, which gets +1/+1 for each card his opponents own that are in exile, and also forces target opponent to exile cards from their library until they hit a land card whenever a nightmare or horror enters under his control. This time he targets Bilal, who exiles a total of 1 card. After that, he casts Yarok's Fenlurker, making each opponent exile a card from their hand, and this makes him lose a life and triggers Umbrous, targeting me, which he couldn't have done since I have Hexproof, but we missed that at the time, so I exile 1 card. Cirque also triggers for both of his spells, exiling each opponent for 1. Bilal plays an island and casts Vengeful Ancestor, creating a copy of it with Miriam. This makes him lose 2 life, and goads Cirque and Umbrous. It also means that whenever a goaded creature attacks, its controller takes 2 damage. I attack Jason for 2, exiling Well of Lost Dreams, gaining me 4 life, and in my second main phase I cast the Well of Lost Dreams, allowing me to pay mana equal or less than any life I gain to draw that many cards. Then, in my end step, I draw for being the Monarch. In Jason's upkeep, he gains 2 life, and casts Obzedat Ghost Council, making Shawn lose 2 life while Jason gains 3. He's also able to exile it at the end of his turn and return it to play during his next upkeep. On Shawn's turn, he equips Umbrous with Whispersilk Cloak, giving him Shroud and Unblockable. He also casts Mind Crank, making it so that whenever an opponent loses life, they mill that many cards. Also at this point, we remember that we all should have milled 2 when Shawn drew for turn, and then Jason counters the Mind Crank with Counter Squall, making Shawn lose 2 life. After that, Shawn moves to combat, attacking me with Umbrous for 15 unblockable commander damage, taking the Monarchy. Since he's also a force to attack with Cirque, he attacks Jason for 2, and Jason blocks with his Archon, and Shawn takes 4 from the Vengeful Ancestors. Before damage though, Shawn casts Resculpt to exile the Archon and make Jason a 4/4 elemental token, saving Cirque. Bilal casts Scourge of the Throne, creating an additional copy when it enters, and then moves to combat, attacking Shawn for 3, goading my Enduring Angel, and taking the Monarchy. I attack Bilal for 2 with Daxos, and Jason for 6 with Enduring Angel, taking 2 since it's goaded. Then, thanks to Daxos, Bilal exiles Ancient Silver Dragon, and I gain 10 life, paying 2 mana for Well of Lost Dreams to draw 2 cards. This also allows me to take the Monarchy back. In Jason's upkeep, he gains 2 life, and then plays an island and casts Esper Charm, drawing 2 cards. After that, he casts a Soul Warden, gaining him a life whenever another creature enters the battlefield, also gaining 1 now thanks to the Suture Priest. He moves to combat, attacking me for 5, taking the Monarchy, and at the end of turn, he both draws for Monarch and exiles Obzedat. When Shawn draws for his turn, each of his opponents mill 2. Then in his first main phase, he casts Consuming Aberration, which has power and toughness equal to the number of cards in opponents' graveyards, and mills each opponent until they hit a land whenever he casts a spell. He immediately plays a swamp and casts Soul Ring, milling each opponent until they hit a land, which in this case is exactly 1 card for each of us. We also remember that Consuming Aberration triggered Umbrous, so Jason exiles the top 2 cards of his library. Shawn then casts Eternal Scourge, triggering the Aberration and Umbrous, first milling all of Shawn's opponents until we hit a land, and then also exiling 2 cards from Jason's library. This allows Shawn to attack Bilal for exactly 21 unblockable commander damage with Umbrous, knocking him out of the game. On my turn, I cast Oblivion Sower, exiling the top 4 cards of Jason's library and putting all lands he owns in exile into play under my control. This winds up giving me a Prairie Stream, 3 Plains, a Swamp, and a Vault of Champions. I then move to combat, attacking Shawn for 6 in the air. In Jason's upkeep, he gains 2 life and also returns Obsidat to play, gaining 4 life while Shawn loses 2. He then plays an island and casts Veto Thorn of the Dusk Rose, making target opponent lose life equal to the life he gains, immediately gaining 2 when it enters and doing 2 damage to Shawn. Then he exiles Obsidat and passes. When Shawn draws for turn, Jason and I both mill 2, and he casts Rite of Replication Kicked to make 5 copies of Consuming Aberration, but luckily, Jason counters it with a Dovin's Veto. However, Shawn still gets the trigger from the Aberration and Cirque, milling the top card of Jason's library while also milling Jason and I until we both hit a land. He then attacks me for 13 unblockable commander damage with Umbrus, attempting to knock me out of the game. But I save myself by casting Aetherize, returning all attacking creatures to their owner's hands. On my turn, I attack Shawn for 6 in the air and 2 with Daxos. Shawn blocks Daxos with the Fenlurker, killing it, but preventing me from exiling the top card of his library. I then re-equip the Robe of Stars to Enduring Angel. In Jason's upkeep, he gains 2 life with Aloro, doing 2 damage to Shawn, and also returns Obsidat to play, gaining 4 life and doing 4 more damage to Shawn. After that, he casts an Alhammarret's Archive, allowing him to gain double the life and draw double the cards, other than the first card he draws in his draw step. At the end of his turn, Jason draws 2 cards for Monarch and exiles Obsidat. When Shawn draws for his turn, Jason and I both mill 2, and he then plays an Exotic Orchard and casts Faceless Butcher to exile my Enduring Angel, but in response, I phase it out. This also has Jason gaining a life and doing 1 damage to Shawn, and it should have actually been 2 life thanks to the archive, but we missed that at the time. Shawn then equips Whispersilk Cloak to Consuming Aberration, giving it Shroud and Unblockable, and moves to combat, attacking me with the Aberration and Eternal Scourge for 48 total damage. Before the damage, I cast Aether Spouts to put all attacking creatures on the top or bottom of their owner's library. Then, at the end of turn, I cast Fact or Fiction, revealing the top 5 cards of my library and letting Jason put them into 2 piles, choosing 1 to go to my hand and the other to the graveyard. This has me putting Muldrifter, Spectral Adversary, and a Swamp to my hand, while the Book of Exalted Deeds and High Market go to the graveyard. When I untap for the turn, Enduring Angel phases back in, and I then cast Muldrifter, drawing 2 cards, and this also gains Jason 2 life, does 1 damage to me, and does 2 damage to Shawn, knocking him out of the game. I then move to combat, attacking Jason for 11 total damage with the Angel and the Eldrazi, and he blocks the Eldrazi with his 4/4 Elemental, killing the token and only taking 6 damage, but still giving me the Monarch. In my second main phase, I play an Esper Panorama, and at the end of turn, I draw a card for being the Monarch. In Jason's upkeep, he gains 4 life from Aloro and Obsidat returns, gaining him another 8 life, but thanks to Enduring Angel, I have hexproof so he can't target me to make me lose the life. He then casts Divinity of Pride, gaining 4 life when it enters. He moves to combat, attacking me with Obsidat for 5, reclaiming the Monarchy and drawing 2 for it at the end of turn, while also exiling Obsidat. Still at the end of turn, I cast Siphon Insight to look at the top 2 cards of Jason's deck, exiling 1 and being able to cast it anytime while the other goes to the bottom. Due to the limitations of playing over webcam, he reveals the 2 cards, and I then choose to exile Thran Dynamo and put an island on the bottom of his deck. After that, I flash back the Siphon Insight to do it again, this time exiling Blind Obedience and putting Arcane Signet to the bottom. I also sacrifice my Esper Panorama to search my library for a swamp and put it into play tapped. On my turn, I cast Out of Time, phasing out all creatures and putting time counters equal to the number of phased out creatures onto Out of Time, removing a time counter each turn and returning the creatures to play once the last counter is removed. In response to the trigger though, I cast Eerie Interlude, exiling all of my creatures and returning them to play at the end of turn. Jason responds by attempting to counter my spell with Counterspell, but I have the answer, using Arcane Denial to counter the counterspell. Then Out of Time resolves, phasing out all the creatures and getting 4 time counters. After that, I play an Evolving Wilds, sacrificing it to search my library for a basic land, put it into play tapped, and then in my end step, all of my creatures return to the battlefield, drawing me 2 cards as the Mulldrifter returns. In Jason's upkeep, he draws 4 cards, and I draw 1 thanks to Arcane Denial. Then he gains 4 life from Aloro and returns Obsidat to play, gaining another 4 life. After that, he plays a Bojuka Bog, exiling my graveyard, and casts Sphinx of the Second Sun, gaining an additional beginning phase at the start of his post-combat main phase. He also casts a Stormscape Familiar, making his white and black spells cost 1 less, and he then moves to his post-combat main phase, untapping his permanents, gaining 4 life with Aloro, and drawing a card. This allows him to cast Kambal, Consul of Allocation, doing 4 damage to an opponent and gaining 2 life whenever that opponent casts a non-creature spell. At the end of turn, Jason draws 2 cards for Monarch and exiles Obsidat. Still at the end of turn, I also cast a Swift End to destroy Kambal, losing 4 life to do so. In my upkeep, I remove a counter from Out of Time and play an Arcane Sanctum before moving to combat. I attack Jason for 2 with Daxos, and he blocks with his Familiar, killing the bird. In my second main phase, I cast Gideon of the Trials and activate Gideon's 0 ability to make an emblem that says I can't lose the game as long as I control a Gideon Planeswalker. But that quickly becomes irrelevant as Jason casts Vanishing Verse, exiling Gideon. In Jason's upkeep, he gains 4 life from Aloro and then returns Obsidat to play, gaining another 4 life. He then casts Cliffhaven Vampire, making each opponent lose a life whenever he gains a life. He also casts Mind Stone and casts his commander, Aloro, Ageless Ascetic, allowing him to pay 1 mana whenever he gains life to draw a card and do 1 damage to each opponent. He then moves to his post-combat main phase, drawing a card, untapping his permanents, gaining 4 life, and doing 1 damage to me. In my upkeep, I remove a counter from Out of Time, cast my commander, Nihiloor, tapping Oblivion Sower when he enters to gain control of Jason's Cliffhaven Vampire. I then move to combat, attacking Jason for 2 with Daxos, exiling a land from the top of his library so I gain no life. And at this point, Jason is dangerously close to milling himself out and doesn't believe he can kill me before that happens, so for the sake of not dragging things out, he decides to concede, winning me the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. Definitely very happy with how the deck performed. I think that we were able to stay alive through multiple different scenarios. Of course, the Aether Eyes and Aether Spouts coming in clutch. But it was nice to see everyone else's deck really do what they wanted to do. I know Bilal didn't get to play as many dragons as I'm sure he wanted. He died very quickly to Umbrus, but he was still doing some very powerful things. Apparently being able to double up on all of your dragons every time you cast them, very strong. So I think that deck, especially in the future, could be very, very powerful. Bilal's deck being able to exile a lot of cards and mill a ton of cards is probably the reason that I wound up winning. I think that if he hadn't milled Jason for quite as much as he did throughout the course of the game, Jason could have just slowly kind of ground me down and won. But the fact that he was only a couple of cards away from decking himself at the end of the game meant that I was able to steal that victory. And then, of course, Jason just gained so much life. He had over 100 life. There was no way that if there wasn't a mill deck at the table, there was no way I was going to be able to kill him. So I'm very thankful to Shawn for being able to set up that victory for me, but it was definitely a difficult road to get there. And I think overall our deck did very well. I think we controlled the board, made sure we didn't die. Like I said earlier, the Aether Eyes, Aether Spouts, preventing attacking from happening. But I think that if we weren't able to stick something like Lich's Mirror on the board relatively soon, we probably would have died quickly after this if Jason hadn't been milled out. So definitely something to consider. Definitely a deck that's going to take some hits and keep on moving, but definitely something your opponents are going to want to keep an eye on. So let me know what you think. Are there any cards you think that we should have added and didn't? Any cards that you think are in the deck list that maybe shouldn't quite be there? Let me know what you think. And of course, if you have any suggestions for future videos, please do let me know in the comments below as well. But otherwise, I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.